Over thousands of years, kingdoms have risen and vanished, their names lost to dust. But some powers don't disappear. They endure. Is greatness measured by conquest and gold, or by something deeper? A legacy that outlives its makers and defies the passage of time? It didn't start with glory, just a handful of huts clinging to a flood-prone river. Yet it became a force that shaped the world, its shadow stretching across centuries into our laws, language, and daily lives. This isn't just the story of a city or even an empire. This is the story of how Rome became eternal. Rome's story doesn't start with a history book. It starts with a myth. A fantastic tale of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, said to be the sons of a princess and Mars, the god of war. The legend says they were abandoned on the Tiber River, left to die but were rescued and nursed by a she-wolf. Found and raised by a shepherd, the brothers grew up to found a city. But a bitter rivalry exploded between them, ending in bloodshed when Romulus killed his own brother and named the new city after himself, Rome. This act of brother killing brother would become a dark theme, a pattern woven right into the DNA of Roman history. Now, as cool as that story is, the real history is a little less dramatic. Around the 8th century BC, a few small villages on the hills overlooking the Tiber River started to band together, probably to defend themselves from their powerful neighbors, the Etruscans. For over a century, Rome was ruled by kings, some Roman, some Etruscan. They laid the groundwork for the city, draining the swamp that would become the Forum, the busy heart of Roman life, and setting up the first constitution. But the Romans grew to hate the very idea of a king. In 509 BC, as the story goes, the Roman nobles got fed up with the last king, Tarquinius the Proud, kicked him out, and created something totally new: a republic. They called it that from the Latin res publica, which means the public thing. It was a radical idea for the time. Power wouldn't be held by a single person anymore. It would be shared. The republic was built on a clever system of checks and balances. 2 consuls were elected every year to run things, but each one could veto the other's decisions. This was supposed to stop any one man from getting too powerful. The Senate, a council of rich elites called patricians, handled policy and the money. The regular folks, the plebeians, didn't have much say at first, but they fought for their rights for centuries. This struggle, known as the conflict of the orders, slowly created a society with a real sense of civic duty and a shared identity as Romans. This new republic wasn't content to just sit still. It was ambitious. It was militaristic. It didn't have some grand plan for world domination. It just happened that one conquest led to the next. Rome fought war after war against its neighbors, and by 272 BC it controlled all of Italy. A key to their success was how they treated the people they conquered. Unlike other empires that just ruled with an iron fist, Rome often gave some form of citizenship or ally status to the defeated. Conquered peoples had to supply soldiers for Rome's armies, which turned former enemies into a massive source of military manpower. This strategy of join us or else was one of the secrets to Rome's unstoppable expansion. Having conquered Italy, Rome started looking outward, across the sea. And there it came face to face with its first great rival, Carthage. Located in modern-day Tunisia, Carthage was a naval and trading juggernaut. A clash was bound to happen. What followed was a series of 3 epic wars known as the Punic Wars. They lasted over a century and would decide Rome's fate. The First Punic War was a fight for the island of Sicily. Rome, a land power, had to build an entire navy from scratch. After 20 long years, Rome won, claiming Sicily as its first ever overseas province. But Carthage wasn't done. In the Second Punic War, the world met one of the greatest military minds in all of history, Hannibal. In a move that was completely insane, Hannibal marched his army, war elephants and all, from Spain over the freezing Alps and straight into Italy. For years, he handed the Romans one crushing defeat after another, most famously at the Battle of Cannae, where his smaller force completely wiped out a huge Roman army. Hannibal brought Rome to the very brink of collapse, and yet Rome just wouldn't break. Even with Hannibal practically at the city gates, the Romans regrouped. Led by a brilliant general named Scipio Africanis, they took the fight to Carthage's home turf in Africa. This forced Hannibal to race back home to defend it. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, Scipio finally beat Hannibal. The war was over, and Rome was now the undisputed champion of the Mediterranean. Decades later, a quick Third Punic War ended with Carthage being wiped off the map. Rome was now an empire in everything but name. Over the next century, its legions marched across the Mediterranean world, conquering Greece, Turkey, and the coast of North Africa. All the spoils of war, insane amounts of money, slaves, and new ideas, came flooding back to Rome. This flood of riches would change Roman society forever, but it also planted the seeds of the Republic's destruction. All that wealth and power began to poison the Republic from the inside. The government, designed for a small city, was now trying to run a massive empire, and it was failing. The money from conquest ended up in the pockets of a few super-rich families, creating a huge gap between them and the poor. Small farmers, who were the backbone of the army, were being pushed off their land by wealthy elites creating massive estates run by slaves. Politics became a corrupt, bloody sport. Ambitious generals now had professional armies that were loyal to them, not to the state, and they used these armies to get what they wanted. The late Republic was torn apart by civil wars. Men like Marius and Sulla literally marched their own armies on Rome to seize power. And into this absolute mess steps one of the most famous people who ever lived, Gaius Julius Caesar, a brilliant general, a charming politician, and a fantastic writer. Caesar was the whole package. He formed an alliance with two other powerful men, Pompey and Crassus, and together the three of them basically ran Rome. As governor of Gaul, what we now call France, Caesar waged a masterful campaign, conquering the whole region. His victories made him rich, incredibly popular with the people, and earned him the fanatical loyalty of his soldiers. This terrified the Senate and his rival, Pompey. They ordered him to give up his army and come home. Caesar had a choice: obey and face political ruin, or defy the Senate and start another civil war. In 49 BC, he made his decision. He led his army across the Rubicon River, the legal border of his province. It was an act of treason, and there was no turning back. The civil war that followed was fast and brutal. Caesar crushed Pompey and his other rivals. By 45 BC, he was the undisputed master of Rome. He was made dictator for life. But to many in the Senate, his ambition looked a lot like the tyranny of the old kings. They thought he wanted to destroy the Republic. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, a group of senators crying, "Thus always to tyrants," stabbed him to death on the floor of the Senate. The assassins thought they had saved the Republic. They hadn't. All they did was unleash its final bloody death throes. Another round of civil wars erupted, this time between Caesar's allies and his killers. Out of all that chaos, two men rose to the top: Caesar's top general, Mark Antony, and his young, clever grandnephew and adopted son, Octavian. After they defeated Caesar's assassins, they inevitably turned on each other. The final showdown was a massive naval battle at Actium in 31 BC. Octavian's forces crushed the fleet of Antony and his lover, the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. The couple fled back to Egypt and took their own lives, leaving Octavian as the one and only ruler of the Roman world. Octavian was a political genius. He knew the Romans would never accept a king. So he pulled off an incredible trick. He claimed to have restored the Republic, but in reality he kept all the real power for himself. The Senate still met, elections were still held, but it was all for show. In 27 BC, the Senate gave him a new title, Augustus, which means the revered one. That moment is what we mark as the official beginning of the Roman Empire. What came next was 200 years of peace and prosperity, unlike anything the world had ever seen before. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Augustus and his successors ruled an empire that stretched from Britain to Iraq, from Germany to the Sahara. Under emperors like Trajan, the empire grew to its absolute largest size. This was Rome's golden age. It was a time of unbelievable engineering. A huge network of roads stitched the empire together, letting legions and goods move at incredible speeds. Massive aqueducts, basically water highways in the sky, carried fresh water into crowded cities. And in Rome itself, they built monuments like the Colosseum and the Pantheon, incredible structures that still stand today as a testament to their genius. The empire was a true melting pot, a globalized economy where goods and ideas flowed freely. But no golden age lasts forever. For 2 centuries, the Pax Romana held strong under a line of pretty good emperors. But by the 3rd century AD, the cracks in the foundation were starting to show. So what went wrong? Well, it was a perfect storm. The empire had stopped expanding, so the flow of money and slaves from new conquest dried up. A series of horrible plagues swept through, killing millions and wrecking the economy. The government, desperate for cash to pay its huge army, started putting less silver in its coins, which led to insane inflation. Political chaos came roaring back. The army, once the protector of the empire, became its biggest problem. Legions just started declaring their own generals as emperor. This kicked off a 50-year-long nightmare known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century. Just constant civil war, assassinations, and chaos. At the very same time, the borders were under attack. So-called barbarian tribes like the Goths and Vandals started launching bigger and more frequent raids into Roman lands. The once mighty Roman army was stretched thin and too busy fighting itself to defend the borders properly. An emperor named Diocletian tried to fix this mess with a radical idea. He split the empire into 2 halves, east and west, each with its own emperor to make it easier to manage. And for a while it worked, but over time the 2 halves just drifted apart. The east grew richer and more stable while the west just kept declining. The final blows came in the 5th century. In 410 AD, the unthinkable happened. For the first time in 800 years, the city of Rome itself was sacked by a tribe called the Visigoths. The psychological shock was huge. The eternal city wasn't so eternal after all. More invasions followed. The Vandals took over Rome's provinces in North Africa, the empire's breadbasket, and then sacked Rome again in 455. The Western Roman Empire was crumbling. Its emperors were just puppets, controlled by powerful Germanic generals. Finally, in 476 AD, the last Roman emperor in the West, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, was quietly kicked off the throne by a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer. No new emperor was named. It was a quiet, almost anticlimactic end to a 1,000-year story. The big question, of course, is why? Why did Rome fall? Historians have argued about it for centuries, and there's no single easy answer. It was a combination of everything: political rot, economic collapse, a military stretched too thin, and constant invasions. The fall wasn't a single event. It was a long, slow crumble. But here's the thing. The end of the Western Empire wasn't the end of Rome's story. Not even close. In the East, the Roman Empire, which we now call the Byzantine Empire, would survive for another 1,000 years, protecting and passing on all that classical knowledge. And even in the West, Rome's legacy was everywhere. The languages we speak today, like Spanish, French, and Italian, they came directly from Latin. Our legal systems are built on a Roman foundation. The very idea of a republic, of citizenship, of a government of laws, that's all Roman. The Catholic Church, based in Rome, became the most powerful force in Europe for centuries. The story of Rome is, in many ways, the story of our own world. It's a story of how a tiny city built the greatest empire the world had ever seen, and how that empire, even after it collapsed, left its fingerprints all over the future. The roads may have crumbled, the legions may have vanished, but the legacy of Rome is all around us. It's in our laws, our words, our buildings, and our very idea of what a civilization can be. And that right there is the ultimate power.